Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flourish every Thursday here at noon, where I am hosting a conversation on authentic gospel living. And so just a caveat here as you hit the comment section and let me know that you're here. I was just informed before we went live that our service provider here at the church for internet is being a little sketchy. So we do have a plan B. I want you to know if this live feed goes down, we're just going to continue and record, and then we'll have that up within the hour so you can check back and watch the recording of it. But we're going to go live so long as our internet provider lets us here at the church where we're broadcasting Flourishing from. So anyway, I'm so glad that you are here. I want to welcome you and encourage you to let me know that you are here. Give me a shout out on the comment section of whatever platform you're tuning into. So I want to say thank you to all of you who subscribed last week as we kind of launched this Flourish blog and podcast. And so we're going to be coming to you every Thursday afternoon, Lord willing. And if you want to subscribe, you'll stay connected to us. And I know many of you who subscribed are enjoying the exclusive content we were able to push your way to your inbox. Jordan Olumi is doing a 14-day devotional delivered right to you on the idea of flourishing in our discipleship, and I know he's doing a great job. Thank you, Jordan, and I hope you are connecting to that with us, and it'll continue here through this week. So I want to say hello to those of you I'm seeing sign in. Hello, Sandra and Sally. Glad that you are here. I know others are watching as well. So to kind of just put this in context, what this conversation on authentic gospel living is about, it really comes down to discipleship to Jesus. And it's helpful to think of our discipleship, at least I find it helpful to think in 4 specific relational directions. You know, I love it when Jesus boils things down. I love to read deep into theology and all of that, but I also appreciate when we can boil things down. And in Mark 12, Jesus really boiled down the commandments about how we're supposed to approach our relationship with God. He boiled them down into 2. And there's actually 4 directions, 4 relational directions represented in those 2. He said, love God and love others as yourself. So there's the upward direction of our discipleship to flourish in our relationship with our Heavenly Father. There is what I call a downward direction to flourishing in our relationship with ourselves as we're reconciled to the Father. And then when he says love others, there's 2 dimensions there. It's loving others who are believers like ourselves. That's the in. And then there's loving others who are not yet believers or followers of Jesus, the world, and that is out. So up, down, in, and out is one way to begin to get a handhold on what to focus on as we look to see our lives become more conformed to the image of Christ because of our discipleship. So that's kind of the frame that we put on living authentic gospel lives together. And that's what I want to talk about each week. I'm going to frame up this conversation here that we're going to have today along the inward direction. And I want to ask a question and get you all to respond, those who have joined in. I want to ask you this question. Do we in the church handle conflict better than the world? Yes or no, and why or why not? Let me repeat that question. Do we in the church handle conflict better than the world handles conflict? Are church folk better at handling and resolving conflict than those who are not apart. Tell me what you think. Just put it down in the chat. Share your opinions and thoughts, and I'm going to circle back to you and your comments, so you don't have to feel rushed to do this. I'm going to take us in a particular direction. Then I'm going to come back to this question and hear your thoughts on it. So. Lily, glad you're here. Robert, I'm glad you're here as well. I actually see my mother has tuned in. And so hello to you, Mom. That's pretty special. Elizabeth is here as well. But why don't you answer this question? Do we in the church handle conflict better than the world? Why or why not? What's been your experience? Let me tell you, there's a word that got down inside of me when I heard it a couple years, and there was something about it that was unique. And I want to tell you what this word is. The word is disputatious. It's like a $10 word. It comes from the idea of dispute, which means being inclined to dispute or having marked disagreement. A person who continually has that about them, you could say that that person or that situation is disputatious. It means you can't agree. But interestingly, I think the one thing I'm safe in saying and that we could all agree on is that our world today is very disputatious, is it not? We live in disputatious times where the disputes among us seem to be multiplying. In fact, I believe there's kind of a spirit of dispute happening all around our culture. You know, we have these momentous events happening, the disconnection of the pandemic, the political climate that we live in. When we feel disconnected with one another, there are more disputes as we were locked in our homes and households. Maybe you experienced more disputes within your household and the people you live with or at work. We live in disputatious times, and there's all manner of things happening in our culture that spikes that disputatiousness in us. I think Facebook is one of those things, and as we're streaming live on its platform, I hope they don't censor me for saying that. But and I don't often recommend films, but I will just tell you that my family and I watched the Netflix original called The Social Dilemma, which looks at the business model that all social media kind of operates on. And kind of digs into that. And one of the things that came out to me is that the whole business model, social media is a part of our lives, and part of the business model, they make more money when we disagree with one another, basically. And so there's all these elements that are creating this disputatious times that we live in. Now, from a worldly, carnal, non-Christian perspective, being disputatious is not a big deal. Being disputatious or being divisive is fine. Even, in fact, in some circles, you'll see that it's actually necessary to be disputatious. And that's kind of a worldly perspective. But we who are trying to live authentic gospel lives know that in the kingdom perspective, disputatiousness is very worldly. It's very sinful to be a person who is disputatious ongoingly. Actually, the Bible calls it a quarrelsome spirit. It speaks of that sort of spirit in us as being very unholy, not becoming, not godly, not conformed to the image of Jesus. So for instance, 1 Corinthians 3:3 tells us this. It says, Paul says, "You are still worldly, for since there is jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere humans?" Romans 14:1 as an example says this, "Accept the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters." 2 Timothy 2:14 goes on to say, "Keep reminding God's people of these things. Warn them before God against quarreling about words. It is of no value. It only ruins those who listen." pretty stark warning. Verse 24 goes on to say in that same chapter, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, not resentful. So we get this picture. When we get lined up with the truth of God's word, we realize that if we are coming across as disputatious, we are living according to the worldly value system and not a kingdom one. And Jesus himself sets the bar really high in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, in the Beatitudes, when he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will see God." So that's kind of a setup to talk about how we regard conflict and, more importantly, how we resolve it. So let me come back to the question that I asked you earlier. Can the church do conflict better than the world? What's been your experience? I'm going to go back and look at some of these comments. Brennan says, in general, I think yes, but church is different. It isn't as different as we're supposed to be in that regard. Some others have commented, keep reminding God's people of these things. That was the 2 Timothy passage. Interested in your comments. Greta says, we're supposed to handle it better. Sadly, we don't always do it in practice. Ruby says, sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. And I think that's been my experience as well. Sometimes we get it right, and then sometimes you have conflict, and those who might have thought me mature, or those I might have thought are more mature, when you have conflict, you see that we can easily all struggle and have difficulty, even in the church. So here's my point. Conflict is inevitable, but disputatiousness and quarrelsomeness isn't. We can have conflict, even between believers, but we can also have hope of resolving that conflict if biblical practices are applied. So here's what we're going to do. Over the next 3 weeks or so, I want to look at a church conflict that happened in the church at Philippi. And I want us to think about and look at how the Apostle Paul tried to resolve that dispute or that conflict and see what we can learn. We want to also achieve that bar that Jesus sets for us as peacemakers. So over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to call it Blessed Are the Peacemakers. Each week we'll take a look at this conflict, and one of the steps are practical things that we can put into practice in our own life that comes out of that. So we're going to be in Philippians chapter 4. Now, forgive me, last week I said Ephesians. I had Philippians in my mind, but Ephesians came out of my mouth. So it's Philippians chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. And I'm just going to read it here for us to set us up for the next time we get together. But Paul had written this letter to the church in Philippi. He's kind of ending his letter, and he brings up something that has come to his attention. And we read this. He says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche. These are two women in the church at Philippi. He says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, loyal yokefellow, his confident, help these women who have contended at my side for the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. And then he goes on to make some other comments. So there was this conflict between these two women, and it was important enough for Paul to bring it up. Paul is imprisoned elsewhere, writing this letter. And so apparently what we understand is as people were coming to visit Paul in prison, he got news that these two women, Euodia and Syntyche, that had worked alongside him and partnered in the gospel, had had a falling out. There was some disagreement between them. And that news reached Paul. The news of the conflict spread. And so Paul begins to address it. And what's interesting is what he says about Euodia and Syntyche is that they were partners in the gospel with him. So these are two women that had influence in the church. These are two women who had a degree of maturity about them. And that's where I think we can learn something from the story right away, is that conflicts between godly people happen in the church. In fact, there's lots of examples you could find just within the New Testament to suggest that even godly, mature believers from time to time will have conflict with one another. And so Paul exhorts them in these two verses I read to resolve their conflict between each other, to resolve it biblically. And then in verses 4 through 9, which we're going to tackle in the coming weeks, he offers what I believe is some really practical and helpful next steps in resolving their conflict. A lot of times, folks will read verses 4 through 9 as kind of standalone statements disconnected from this conflict. And I believe you could probably, we can read it that way as standalone comments. But it's interesting when you put the lens of this conflict on verses 4 to 9, what begins to emerge. And that's what I want us to take this journey over the next few weeks together as we unpack that. So I encourage you to start reading Philippians chapter 4, verses 2 through 9, and we'll see what connections we can make. As this is a conversation on authentic gospel living, I want it to be super practical and helpful to where we are all at. And if we are going to flourish in the inward dimension of our discipleship journey, that is flourishing in our relationships with other believers, we have to become peacemakers. We have to become more what Jesus says is blessed about the peacemakers. When we have a falling out, when we have a conflict, there is hope of healing and reconciliations. That's why peacemakers in Jesus' economy are blessed, because they will see God. They will see God moving in their conflicts. And I remember I asked last week how many of us, digitally raised our hand to say we've got some conflicts in our relational world. So my prayer and my hope is that this ongoing series here over the next couple weeks, Blessed Are the Peacemakers, will be helpful and dialed in to where you're at, and we can learn and live out more authentic gospel lifestyles when it comes to conflict over the next couple weeks. So I'm going to leave today's time there. Thank you again so much for joining me, and we'll take this journey together and see what we learn in coming weeks. So please remember to subscribe to the Flourish blog so that you can stay in touch and in tune, and we'll be back next week with another episode on Blessed Are the Peacemakers as a part of this whole Flourish project. So God bless and have a great day. See you later.